Hi everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be going through my predictions for the 2019 A-Level Psychology paper, and this is for paper 2. First, I'm going to be looking at the approaches section. What was in the 2018 paper? We had the evaluation of schemas, displacement, which is a part of the psychodynamic theory, and then that key 16-mark question which looked at comparing the behaviourist and biological approaches. What kind of things do I think could come up in the 2019 paper? So you've got Wundt and psychology as a science, so that's kind of the emergence of psychology, introspection, the labs, that kind of thing. You've got social learning theory, which is attention, retention, motor reproduction and motivation, as well as that key study by Bandura. I think if this one were to come up, it's more than likely to be an application question. You've also got the cognitive theory, which looks at the theoretical and computer models. So that's the idea of likening the brain to that of a computer, as well as your theoretical models being that such as the multi-store model of memory, the working memory model, all of that. Within this, you've also got the idea of artificial intelligence. You've got the role of schema, which has of course come up before. You've got the emergence of cognitive neuroscience, which looks at brain scans, and then also links to disorders with that neurochemistry kind of background. So that's things such as OCD, schizophrenia, you name it. I do think there's a good chance that cognitive neuroscience could come up in itself in a smaller question, just because it hasn't really been touched upon before, but it is such a prominent thing in society nowadays, which is what psychology and AQA really like to touch upon. Next, we've got the humanistic approach, which of course was that 16-mark question in 2017, but there's nothing to say it won't come up as a smaller question again this year. So within that, you've obviously got the idea of free will, self-actualization, you've got that hierarchy of needs, the ideal self compared to the actual self and that congruency or incongruency, as well as client-centered therapy. We've also got the psychodynamic approach, which although it's come up in small areas beforehand, so such as displacement, I think there was a question in the 2017 paper that touched upon the psychodynamic theory. It hasn't really come up as a whole with that idea of the unconscious, the subconscious, the conscious, the idea of repression, the structure of personality, so of course your id, ego, superego, and then of course the psychosexual stages, which perhaps is what the psychodynamic theory is most known for. With that one, there's just so much that could come up as that whole 16-mark question. I definitely wouldn't rule it out despite its subtle appearances in the other papers. And then lastly on here, I've just put about comparison question. So I do think AQA were quite proud of themselves with this question. I mean, although pretty much everybody was expecting it, it's just such a key question because it brings in your knowledge of two approaches, and comparing them isn't something that kind of comes naturally, if you will. Like, it does take a bit more thought, so I don't think we should draw out a comparison question for this year, though less likely. I do think AQA might do that again. You never know. Next, we have biopsychology. What was in the 2018 paper for this section? You've got the role of the somatic nervous system, the labelling of a neuron, synapses, so that was synaptic transmission but in a different way, so it was talking about why they can't travel backwards. And then you also had a question on synaptic transmission in 2017. You've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, so more specifically the fight or flight application question. And then you've got the role of exogenous Zeitgebers. What kind of things do I think could come up in the 2019 paper? You've got your localization of function, so of course this is about your four lobes. So you've got the parietal, the temporal, the frontal and the occipital, as well as your language areas, so the Broca's and Wernicke's areas. As I've noted here, damage to the Broca's and motor cortex did come up as an application question in 2017, so perhaps less likely, but of course we don't know what AQA want to do. You've also got plasticity and functional recovery, so again, as I've noted, this come up in the 2017 paper alongside the damage to Broca's and motor cortex, so that was a question following on from that. So within this section, you've of course got your Maguire and Traginski studies, so that's your taxi and medical students. And then with functional recovery, there are a few different things that can happen during recovery, such as axonal sprouting. Next up, we've got investigating the brain. So this is of course your different methods of studying the brain. So you've got your different types of brain scans, you've got your post-mortem studies, all of those. You've got them 4 different methods. This was a question worth 8 marks in the 2017 paper. So perhaps if this were to come up, it may be worth less marks. We just don't know. Lastly, you've got your circadian, ultradian and infradian rhythms. So this hasn't really come up before, so I think it is definitely likely, hence why it's in red. So your infradian rhythms, you've of course got your menstrual cycle as well as the seasonal affective disorder, and there are studies to go alongside these. And then the ultradian rhythm, that key one is your stages of sleep with those 4 key stages. And then of course you've got your circadian rhythm with the key one being that sleep-wake cycle. Next, I'm going to look at what was in the 2018 paper for research methods. So you've got the purpose of pilot studies, what is qualitative data as well as the strength of this, what are investigator effects as well as how to limit these, random sampling, content analysis, testing for reliability. So in this you could have spoken about inter-rater reliability, test, retest, that kind of thing. You also had to construct a bar chart, you had to make your own consent form, there was a question on counterbalancing, what type of design was used within a scenario and why, so that was repeated measures. You've got problems with this type of design, so repeated measures, comparing means and standard deviations within a table. There was also a question on the 95% confidence level, why we use control groups and what's good about this. So what kind of things do I think could perhaps come up in research methods in the 2019 paper? So you've got your sign test. Out of all the statistical tests, this is the only one you're required to be able to do. So I do think this is quite a good one that they could ask because it does really test your maths skills. And of course, the maths skills does make up 10% of the A level. And I think this is a nice easy one to have also. You've also got your designing an experiment. So in 2017, it come up that you were required to design an observation. So I think this time round designing an experiment could be a good one. These are usually worth about 12 marks. You've also got your features of a science. So for example, a question could come up such as discussing the arguments for and against psychology being considered a science. I think again this is a big one. Psychology is moving more and more towards that idea of it being a science through the idea of falsifiability, for example. So I don't see why this couldn't come up, and I do think this is quite a good one they could do. You've also got the idea of creating hypotheses, so that's your null hypotheses as well as experimental hypotheses. You've also got aims to be created here, and of course you need to make sure you don't mix up an aim and a hypothesis. Then there's also sections of a scientific report. So you've got your abstract, your introduction, your method, your discussion, and then referencing. Referencing, of course, come up in paper 3 in 2017, and I think they pretty much scrapped those marks for them because nobody got it. So I do think this is going to come up at some point again. I don't know if 2019 is too soon for that because people now expect it, but of course people are just going to keep expecting it until it does arise again. So I don't see a reason as to why that couldn't come up. Or again, one of the other sections, so for example, it could ask you what kind of information goes into an introduction or a method or discussion. You name it, they could ask it. You've also got the working out whether results of a stats test are significant. So this did come up in 2017. It's the kind of thing that could come up every year, worth a few marks. And within this, you could also justify the use of particular stats tests. So for example, chi-squared or Wilcoxon. This could just come up wherever. We've also got type 1 and 2 errors. So a question on type 2 errors come up in 2017, so there's no reason it couldn't come up again. We've got ways of improving reliability. So last year there was more of a focus on validity. So this year it could be on reliability. We've got the evaluation of case studies. So of course case studies are a big thing in psychology. Freud with little hands just as one example of many. So I think evaluating this could definitely come up. It hasn't really come up before, so it could definitely come up in here. We've also got ethical issues, so there are many ethical issues to do with studies, and you could just be asked to name a few. You could be given a scenario and you could be asked to identify the different ethical issues that have arisen. We've also got psychology and the economy, so I definitely think this is a big one. This is the kind of thing that just crops up everywhere. I don't see why this wouldn't come up. Again, I was expecting this to come up last year and it didn't, so I do think it's very likely that the psychology and the economy will come up. And then finally, I've just put peer review. So there was a question on the purpose of peer reviews as well as the strength of peer reviews in 2017. And again, it didn't come up last year, so I don't see why it couldn't come up this year. As you can probably see, there are things that I haven't really put onto this list which are pretty much guaranteed to come up. So you've got the construction of a graph. That comes up practically every year. Even if it's not in paper 2 in the research methods question, it's definitely likely to come up in either paper 1 or paper 3 instead. So we've had quite a few bar charts recently, so I don't see why it couldn't be a scattergram or a line graph this time, with your correlation coefficients to go alongside this. You've got many things that do just come up every single year. The justifying the use of a stats test is one. Again, we saw it in paper 1 last year. There's no reason as to why it couldn't be in any of the sections this year. With all of that being said, I just wanted to say a huge good luck to all of you. I hope you absolutely smash it. I'm sure you will, with plenty of revision. Obviously, it goes without saying not to take what I've said as gospel. Make sure you revise everything, but it is quite handy to know what came up last year and so what I think could come up this year. Again, good luck everyone.